And so here we are, ladies and gentlemen, Rabbi Karas.
Thank you very much. A lot of this talk was really inspired by the style of it by Rabbi Mendel and the way that he connects things. So I'm glad to be doing it here and sharing with all of you. Thank you for having me. So first of all, who here has ever seen a Bitcoin before? Good. Well, the answer is nobody. Nobody has ever seen a Bitcoin because, strictly speaking, there are no Bitcoins. This is just a toy. Bitcoins are just numbers on a computer program. Really, Bitcoin is a distributed ledger that's shared on a network of tens of thousands of computers around the world. You can think of it kind of like a Google Drive spreadsheet. But with this technology, digital money can be sent directly from one person to another anywhere in the world without going through a financial institution. Peer-to-peer electronic cash. Now, what does Judaism have to say about Bitcoin? Well, what does Judaism have to say about money? From silver shekels to dinars to dollars and PayPal, money has had many different forms throughout history. And as with other technologies like medicine and communication, Jews have always used whatever tools which were available to them to enhance their Jewish way of life. To understand the Jewish perspective of money and Bitcoin, let's start looking at the first time money is ever mentioned in the Torah, and then we'll work our way up to today. So beginning with money in Judaism. The first thing is the perspective of what, we all know what money is, but why do we have money and what it's for? So there's the famous prayer, the Shema, which everyone is familiar with. We say that the Lord is, hear all Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And then we say, you shall love God with all your heart and soul and with all of your means. And there are different ways of translating that, but with all of your means one way of interpreting it or translating it is with all of your money in your possession. So really all of our wealth and any form of money we have to know that the purpose of it is to serve God and to be a better person and to make the world a better place. Where we find money in the Torah. The very first time money is actually mentioned is pretty early in the Torah, when Abraham purchased the Ma'arat Machpelah, the cave of the Machpelah in Hebron, when Sarah dies and then he needs to find a burial place for her. So it says that Abraham weighed out to Ephron silver, 400 shekels of silver accepted by the merchant. So he had the best, highest quality, expensive, heavy silver coins. And this is the prototype of what money is throughout the Torah and throughout rabbinic literature. Actually, the word in Hebrew for money is kesef, is silver. So that's kind of like the prototype idea of what money is. That was the historical use of money. A second very popular place that money is found in the Torah is the collecting of the half shekel. So that we actually just read in this last week's Torah portion, that when the Jewish people were in the desert and they had to build the tabernacle, it was collected from every person or each household a half shekel, and from that they built the tabernacle. So it was pretty interesting that when it came to collecting this, God told Moses, tell everybody to give a half shekel, and Moses was bewildered. He said, how can we build a tabernacle to atone for ourselves with just giving half a coin? God showed him a sort of coin of fire, which is pretty interesting and slightly related to Bitcoin, as we'll see later. But there's a famous Hasidic teaching about this, that when you give money and whenever you really give anything, you have to give it with fire, you give it with passion. And when you get involved in the world and get financially involved, even in charity ways, you do it with a fiery passion. So those are two of the ways that we read in the Torah. But really money is something that has a lot of Jewish legal applications in our lives. The texts that discuss how money is used and when it has to be used are found throughout history of all different types of Jewish literature, in Talmud, in the Rambam, in modern halachas, and throughout our business dealings we might have transactions or loans or contracts or partnerships or go to court, all different to Jewish court, all these different scenarios where we would end up needing money and how much you have to pay. But throughout all of these literatures, it doesn't really say what kind of money we have to use. I mean, do we have to use silver? Sometimes yes, but most of the time not. really throughout Jewish law, for the most case, you use whatever money is available to you. So if you're in America, use dollars. If you're in Europe, euros, and Israel, shekels, whatever it is, but there's not such a requirement of what it has to be. These are some of the most common things that in our daily Jewish lives that we would use our money for. So one is for giving tzedakah, charity. Meiser ksafim is the idea that a 1/10 of your, is like tithing in English, 1/10 of your wealth you give to charitable causes. A pidyon haben, is everyone familiar with that idea? That it says in the Torah when you have a firstborn son, you actually, this is a cute little picture of you give silver coins, and that actually the Torah does designate that it does have to be given as silver coins that weigh a certain amount, and we to this day, you have to do that. You can't give dollars, you can't give a check or credit card, you give it to a Kohen, and you give them silver coins. Another time that we use specifically not dollars or anything, but we use gold, is when you get married. You give a gold ring, or it doesn't have to be gold, but you give something of value, and that people don't necessarily realize that's actually a transaction. That's a financial transaction, and someday when you'll get married, God willing, the rabbi might ask you, "Is this do you own this?" Because you have to own that ring, and then you give it as a transaction to your bride, and you should preferably have bought it. So when I got married, I was a poor yeshiva student, so I got a little help. The rabbi asked me, "Did you buy this with your own money?" And I said, "My father gave me a good discount on it." So but you do have to own it, and you do have to pay for that. So these are some of the Jewish money uses. Sometimes they have to be done with silver or with metals, and other times it can just be done like you can give tzedakah with coins or with a credit card or anything. But that is ways that we use money in Judaism. So how did we get from these silver coins from the Torah to the money that we are today? So that is the history of money. First of all, what is money? Why do we even have money? What does money serve? So it has three main purposes. One is a store of value. That when you work and you want to keep all of your value, you don't want to store it in meat or stock up your refrigerator and that's all the money that you have. You actually want something that holds its value over time. You also want a means of exchange, so you want to be able to go to the store and spend your money and buy something that you want with it. And a unit of account, which means that when you go to the store and you buy a soda, it costs $1. You measure how much things cost in the unit of account. So these are what money has to do. Some things are better at being money, and some things are worse at being money. So what makes a good money? A good money is that if you have these 6 attributes. One is durability, so it has to be something that doesn't rot or spoil or get destroyed. Like bananas would not be good money because they would just rot away. It has to be portable, so you can carry it around with you. So a couch is not a great example of money. You can't take it with you. Divisibility, it has to be able to divide up into the amount that you want to use it for. So animals like livestock is not great at being money, because if you want to give a half a cow, you can't give someone a half a cow. It's not going to be a live cow anymore. Uniformity means that each element of that, each unit of that money is worth the same. So things like diamonds, where every diamond is different, or seashells, every single thing is different. It's hard to be money because they're not all worth the same. Limited supply means that if you can't have something that is very, very plentiful, sand can never be money, water can't be money, air can't be money, because there's just too much of it. It has to have to have the demand, it has to have somewhat of a limited supply. And acceptability, it has to be something that people want. So you might have something that's good money in one location, but if you go to another place, and if somebody tries to spend money with Japanese yen, I don't really want that, so that doesn't serve as good money for me. So with these things, the more of these attributes you have, the better the money is. So the question is, why need money at all? Nobody actually wants to be holding coins or pieces of paper or anything like that. We want stuff, we want clothes, we want food, we want houses. Why not just trade? There are a few problems with that. You need a lot of coincidences to happen to make trade and barter work. Sometimes it does work, but most of the time in a big scale it doesn't. To make barter work, you need a coincidence of wants. So if I have shoes and you have food, we have to both want what the other one wants. So that we also need a coincidence of time, meaning that we have to want the same thing that we can trade at the same time. Also coincidence of scale. So if you want a house and I want food, we can't really trade with each other because it's a different amounts. And also coincidence of location. This can be very difficult with property because people are all over the place and it's hard to find the right person at the right time with the right thing. So this is why barter doesn't work, and you eventually need some kind of stand-in object that serves as money. So what were primitive forms of money? This means this is what we found. These are from thousands of years ago, or in like islands or tribes or things. They would use these things as money. They weren't excellent forms of money, but they served some of the properties. So some could be beads, seashells, certain types of rocks, salt, cattle, gems. All of these things have some of the attributes of good money, but are lacking in other places. So eventually, over time, all of these primitive forms of money were pushed away for one of the most popular forms of money which survived for thousands of years, which is precious metals. And so that brings us back to the times of the Torah and what the Torah and Jewish law for most time discussed, which was using gold coins, silver, and copper. That these things are very durable. They're very uniform. 1 pound of gold or 1 ounce of gold is the same as another ounce of gold. You can move them around. You can have smaller amounts with copper, and you can do lots of good things. They serve a lot of good purposes. So universally around the world, these became agreed upon as very good forms of money. And particularly in the past few hundred years, gold took on an especially popular role because gold is a very rare metal, much more rare than silver and copper. And so what that means is that silver, we find a lot of silver in the ground. It's much more plentiful than gold, which means if you know the economics 101, as supply goes up, the demand and the price goes down. Gold has a very stable and very low rate of growth and of discovering and mining gold from the ground. So it became, over the past couple hundred years, it ran away with the popularity of money, whereas 3,000 years ago, in the times of the Torah and the times of the Talmud, silver was the more common of the money use. And gold, but there is a problem with gold, and there is a problem with silver and all of these things. They're heavy. It's heavy and it's easy to steal. You carry around, if you want to buy a house and you've got your pockets full of gold coins or silver coins, it can be kind of a nuisance. And it's difficult to, let's say you get a gold coin, how do you know that it's real gold? Maybe it has some copper. Countries could take their gold and they could mix other metals in it. It was hard to, silver could be mixed, I think, with iron. So it wasn't so easy to check on your own metals and to take care of them. So people started making banks. Banks were a place where you could store your money, and one, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to protect it because they're protecting it for you, and you don't have to drag it around with you because the banks could have a relationship, and that you instead of carrying your money, you just have a piece of paper, and that's called a promissory note or a bank note. And that represents the money that's in the bank, the gold or the silver or something else. And so it's just as good as if you have the gold with you, but it's much more convenient. You can carry a wallet with hundreds of gold coins instead of having your pockets full. So that was how we got from metal money to paper money. And actually, in the United States and in other countries, it was the law that this kind of money, these paper documents that represented gold, were the form of money, the official form of money. So this was a gold bill. This was called the gold standard. And so this loosely existed in parts of the 1800s and the early 1900s. But the problem with that is that, or at least from the perspective of governments, is that they were if you have to have your paper money backed by gold, so then you can only make as much money as you have gold. And so in the 20th century, in the 1900s, most countries went off of gold at some point, and they just decided, we're going to use the paper money. Everybody likes the paper money. Everybody has the paper money. They're already using it, and everyone accepts it. So we're not going to have gold backed anymore, and the countries did it in steps. First in the 1930s, the United States went off gold, and then in the 1970s to a much greater degree. But so now we're at the stage where we are, which is called fiat money. So the dollar bills that we all have, whether it's dollars or coins or money in our bank. That's called fiat, which fiat money is a currency without intrinsic value that has been established as money, often by government regulation. The term derives from the Latin fiat, let it be done, used in the sense of an order, decree, or resolution. So there is no gold. Each dollar is not backed by a certain amount of gold or a certain amount of silver in a bank somewhere like it was in the turn of the last century. And people maybe think that this is all just dollars or that there are vaults of $100 bills. It doesn't work like that either. Most of it's just digital. Banks don't, when you give, you'll put your money in the ATM and you put in $100, they don't have like a cubby there with your stacks of money in the bank. They have some, but it's not a fully reserved system. Most of it is just numbers on a ledger, and they just adjust them how they want to and how you use them. So there's a big problem with this, though, is that when there's no limit on, there's no peg of the dollar to anything tangible or anything physical, there's not a limit of how much of it that you can print. It's up to the people who decide in government of how much they want to print or how much they decide they need. And that's led to, over the past 100 years, the value of fiat currency drastically dropping. Everybody knows, if you've heard from your parents or your grandparents, and they tell you how much things used to cost when they were kids. My grandfather would say that when he was a kid, movies costed for 2 tickets 5 cents. So you would get 2 cents and you'd find a rich kid who had 3 cents, and the two of you could go to the movie together. Now movies cost, I don't know how much they cost now, $10 more than that. Did movies become 100 times more valuable than they were before? Not exactly. The dollars that we have and the cents that we have became less valuable. Because there's more being printed, so each of our currencies, everything the money that we have in our bank accounts, actually lost value over years. So that's called inflation. Some countries have worse inflation than others. Some are pretty good. The United States, at least in the past 10 or 20 years, hasn't had a terrible amount of inflation. Israel hasn't had a terrible amount of inflation. But one country that stands out in our generation is the worst is Venezuela. If anyone follows the news and what's going on in Venezuela, it's a horrible situation. Their money loses so much value that you can't even save anything from one day to the next, even, or over the course of weeks or months. The money doesn't have any value. And this is called hyperinflation. 2 distinct times that this has happened in history is one, what's going on now in Venezuela, but also in the Weimar Republic, which was Germany at the turn of the century after World War I, when they had a lot of debt to pay. They were printing money, and what happens is that it cycles out of control, and it leads to pictures like this, where you can see they're sweeping up dollars on the floor, or like in Venezuela, where you need stacks and stacks of money to buy looks like diapers there. So this is something that doesn't happen everywhere in the world, but it can happen when countries don't take care of their finances well and print too much money. In any case, all fiat currencies, the entire world, every monetary system that we're all involved in is based on trust and trusting people and institutions and governments. As opposed to for thousands of years where our money was something there was like a physical attachment, there's gold or there's silver or something. Now all the money that we have is based on our government. So in the United States we have a strong government, so the money is stronger, and in weaker countries the money is weaker, but it's all based on trusting the institutions. So the question is, what if we could have a system with the benefits of paper and digital money, but with no requirement to trust in corporations, governments, or banks to manage our money for us? And that's where Bitcoin comes in. Bitcoin was a technology or a bunch of technologies that came together in 2008 and 2009, and the main thing that it solved was a computer science problem. It's called the double spend problem. So here's the problem with digital money. Now everybody knows when you send a text message or an email and you send a photo to somebody else, you didn't lose the photo. You both have it now. If you send somebody a song or a video, they have it and you have it. So how can you text somebody money or email somebody money? Because money can't work that way, that you give your money to someone and then you also still have it. So it had to be solved a way that you can that you could send money to somebody else, and at the same time you lose it. Now, one way that works is by having a centralized entity that it decides all of these things. So like PayPal or Venmo or something like that, or the Cash App, or if you have a bank app, something like that, where you're both trusting in this bank, and they have the ledger in their centralized server, and they decide who has the money, and that works for most people. But the double spend problem, is how to do that without anybody having to trust each other. So that's where Satoshi Nakamoto came in. He was an anonymous or pseudonymous. We don't know who he was. He disappeared, and nobody's heard from him in about like 8 years. He sent out an email onto a forum of like computer coders and hackers and things, and he said, "I've developed a new open source peer-to-peer e-cash system called Bitcoin. It's completely decentralized with no central server or trusted parties because everything is based on crypto proof instead of trust." That in October 31st, 2008, he released what was called the white paper, which was a PDF that was 9 pages long, that is written like half in plain English and half in cryptography, techno-babble, which I can't understand, but it explains and it lays out the framework for how this system was going to work. And then a few months later, he actually released the software and made what was called the Genesis block, which was the very first block of the blockchain of Bitcoin. And that was where it all started. January 3rd, 2009, we actually just celebrated the 10-year anniversary in this past January. For the first year that Bitcoin was in existence, it had zero value. It was not something that anybody was willing to pay for, and it was more of like a science project. It was interesting. Some people followed it, but you couldn't really do anything with it until the first real-world transaction happened about a year and a half after Bitcoin was released, which was a blog post on a forum that somebody wanted to buy. He requested, "I'll pay 10,000 Bitcoins for a couple of pizzas." So that means that he was charging, or he was pricing Bitcoin at 25 thousandths of a cent is how much a Bitcoin was worth at that time. He got the 2 pizzas. I heard that they were really good, and he doesn't regret selling that 10,000 Bitcoin till this day. But the point is that through the years, in the 9 years since that day, the price of Bitcoin went from that 25 thousandths of a cent up to actually $20,000 in the winter of December of 2017. The price has fluctuated, it's gone up and down. It's kind of like a roller coaster, but it's still above $3,000 now, and it's appreciated quite a bit since its early days. And actually, even though it's been very volatile and it's gone up and down, the volatility overall in the course of the past 10 years has actually been decreasing, so it's become more stable over time. It used to fluctuate from $1 to $30 back down, and now it's a much more stable system than what it was. So how does this work? I'm going to show you now a short little video which gives some of the tech and some of the computer science behind it. It's tried to make it a little simple, but it's a little over my head, but hopefully you'll get a little bit of the idea of how this all works.
Bitcoin lets people exchange money electronically as easily as sending an email or text. To send money, you use what's called a wallet app to type in an amount, enter or scan a recipient's account number, and hit send. The recipient will then see the money pop up in their account. So how does this work? At a basic level, Bitcoin is just a ledger with account numbers and balances. When Bob sends Carol 5 Bitcoins, his balance goes down by 5 and Carol's up by 5. There's no gold or government-issued money backing these numbers, just people's belief that the numbers are worth something, and a system that prevents unfair changes. Part of the system makes sure no one can spend money from someone else's account. Every time you hit send, your wallet app sends a message to the Bitcoin network describing how the ledger should change, including the sender's and recipient's account numbers and amount to transfer. So what's to prevent a thief from creating a message transferring money from someone else's account? Bitcoin requires a kind of signature on each message to prove that it was created by the true account owner. The signature serves the same purpose as a handwritten signature on a paper check, but it's based on math rather than handwriting. The math comes from the world of cryptography, which is normally used to hide secret messages, but in Bitcoin has been repurposed to prove ownership. Each Bitcoin account number has an associated key that only the true account owner knows and is used to create signatures by encrypting transaction messages. Others test the signature by trying to decrypt it. If successful, they know the signature was created by the true account owner. In addition to not relying on handwriting analysis, these math-based signatures can't be copied and reused on other transactions, since the signatures are unique to each transaction. So these signatures keep unauthorized transactions from changing the ledger, but who exactly is checking the signatures and overall maintaining the ledger? Surprisingly, anyone who wants to. One of the main goals of Bitcoin is to provide a decentralized system, meaning no single company or government can control it. Every time someone sends money, a transaction message is passed around to all the people who want to help maintain the ledger, who all call maintainers. Each maintainer keeps a personal copy of the ledger and updates it whenever they receive a new transaction with a valid signature. With ledgers spread all over the world, traffic delays and occasionally fraud can lead to differences in those ledgers. So how does the world decide which version to use? Like in other democratic systems, there's a vote, but it's a bit different than a typical ballot system. Maintainers vote by trying to solve a special puzzle based on their version of the ledger. The first person to solve a puzzle announces their solution, and everyone updates to that version. So the vote turns out to be a kind of mathematical race, but it's designed to favor the majority's version. This is because the more people there are working on a particular version, the faster it will be solved. Because new transactions are constantly being generated, this voting process repeats over and over again so maintainers can continually agree about new transactions. So why math problems instead of, say, emailing in votes to decide on a ledger? Without a central authority to register voters, it would be hard to enforce one vote per person. A single person could create multiple accounts to vote more than once, or even millions of times. The math problems prevent this by making each vote have a cost in computers and electricity. This means outvoting or outsolving the majority to take over the ledger would effectively require outspending the majority, an unlikely event. So the math enables a fair vote in a decentralized system. A final note about how money is created. Every time a puzzle is solved, a small award is added to the solver's balance, effectively creating money out of thin air. This award acts as an incentive for people to help maintain the ledger, and is in addition to small fees senders attach to transactions. Because maintainers acquire newly created money through computation, they are typically called miners, but their main purpose is really to manage the ledger, not to create money. The voting system simply provides a convenient way to randomly distribute money into the world, and in fact, after 2140, no more money will be created. In summary, Bitcoin is an electronic currency that's based on a collaboratively maintained ledger. People transfer money by sending messages to maintainers describing where and how much money should move. Maintainers make sure that the messages are from the true account owners by checking digital signatures. And finally, the maintainers reach consensus with each other through a math-based voting process.
That's how the blockchain works in general, and that's what was the invention of Bitcoin. Now, since that time, in the past 10 years, a lot of companies and people have tried to take this idea and see if they can expand it and make other things on it. So these are called alternative coins. There's over 1,000 or 2,000 maybe of it, and they all kind of took Bitcoin and are seeing if they can change certain things and make it into a smart contract platform or make a stable coin or a lot of various different things. Some people are trying to make more privacy elements to it, but so there are a few thousand of these, but over the past 10 years, Bitcoin is worth more than all of them combined, and some of them turn out to be not so legitimate, some of them more, but that's the world of altcoins and cryptocurrency in general. But Bitcoin is the original technology that is the idea behind it all. Miners get, when they run their computers and run the Bitcoin software, they get a reward. They get some, that's where Bitcoin comes from. It comes from running this software on your computer. And the way that it worked was originally, the Bitcoin that was released was 50 Bitcoins every 10 minutes. Every 10 minutes a new block is created, and whichever computer found that block gets the reward, the 50 Bitcoin. After 4 years, that decreased in half and went down to 25. And now it's currently decreased again. Now we're at 12.5. So every 10 minutes, there's a miner or a group of miners, a pool of miners that receive 12.5 Bitcoin. Now they don't get it for free. They have to spend their electricity and they have to buy these machines and special hardware to do it. And and eventually it will keep decreasing half. So it will go down from 12.5 to 6.255, and then it will eventually in 100 years go down to 0. And then there will just be transaction fees, and there won't be a reward that provides any more Bitcoin to people. And that is called halving. Every 4 years, approximately, it halves and it goes down to 0. So in about 500 days, in May of 2020, the reward will go down from 12.5, and that's how you get a limited supply. It doesn't just keep on going forever. And that leaves us to eventually, after 2100, 2040, you've got the inflation rate of Bitcoin goes down to 0 because there are no new coins being created. When you've got the total, which is 21 million coins, and that's the largest amount there will ever be. There will never be made any more Bitcoin than this 21 million. Now, it seems like a lot that one Bitcoin is worth over $3,000, but really each one is divided up into 100 million parts. Now, these parts have been named by the community Satoshis. They're the smallest unit of a Bitcoin, and that's the smallest amount that you can own. Now, Satoshi right now at the current price is like 3/1000th of a cent. It's a very, very small amount, and so that even though a Bitcoin is thousands of dollars. So that is the divisibility of the network. So that is Bitcoin, and that's how it works. And the question is it kosher? Is it something that you should be involved in? Is it something that you should be using or not? So in general, on the question of how we should have our view of new technologies and sciences and things like that. The Lubavitcher Rebbe had a quote when in the mid-20th century when he wanted his talks to be played on radio and television. And there were some rabbis asking, is it a good thing to be involved with? Television is full of terrible things and mostly non-Jewish things, and radio also. Why would you want to get yourself involved in all of those? And this was his response. The ultimate purpose for which these new technologies were developed is that they can be used for holy purposes. The fact that they can also be used for mundane purposes and even things that are the opposite of holiness is to facilitate free choice. And God commands, requests, and grants the capacity that you shall choose life. So that's the general overall perspective when it comes to looking at a new technology. Now, practically, Bitcoin is legal in most places in the world. In the United States and most modern civilized countries, you can use Bitcoin. And it's not just legal, but there are lots of laws and regulations. So U.S. Treasury classified Bitcoin as a currency. The Federal Trade Commission classified Bitcoin as a commodity. This is having to do with tax purposes. And even in 2018, the Supreme Court discussed Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, saying perhaps one day employees will be paid in Bitcoin or some other type of cryptocurrency. So the United States in particular and countries all over the world are figuring out how to deal with Bitcoin and other cryptos. There's regulations going from state to state. New York State actually has pretty bad regulations, but Wyoming is doing a lot of things. Some of the exchanges are regulated. There's some states you can even pay taxes with your Bitcoin. So the country as a whole and states are figuring out how to deal with this, but there are regulations, and the general attitude is to figure out how to regulate it as opposed to trying to ban it. Bitcoins are taxable, so if you get capital gains, if you buy and then you sell, you can pay taxes on it. And you can even, in Ohio, they passed a law that you can pay your taxes in Bitcoin if you want to. So if you have Bitcoin and you owe taxes, state taxes, you can send it and they will accept that. Now, this is another positive thing because it's a public ledger, meaning all of the transactions are written and clear. Anybody can examine it. So that means that it's impossible to counterfeit a Bitcoin. You can't make a duplicate of it. You also, if you get involved in illegal activities, all of those transactions are written forever on the blockchain. So it's a very dangerous thing to get involved in illegal activities or to, let's say, embezzle money. If you're held responsible for holding a certain amount of Bitcoin, it can be tracked where that's going. So this is actually a beneficial thing, and the FBI has lots of tools and is working on how to analyze. So if you're worried about the legal aspects of it, it's a pretty well accepted that Bitcoin is not good for doing illegal activities. Whereas the opposite is true for cash. Cash is the main thing that's used in drug dealings and all kinds of things like that because it's not traceable. So $100 bills, you can carry it around in a suitcase or in bags and take it under the border and things like that. That's really where a lot of crime, so to speak, small crime or violent crime is happening. And then in banks and international banks, there's a lot of crime also as far as money laundering and things of that manner. So it's not like Bitcoin, it doesn't lend itself to crime, and it's actually the opposite. So what is Bitcoin, what can it be used for? What is cryptocurrency good for? One is international payments. So there's no borders in cryptocurrency. You can send it immediately. It doesn't have to go through customs. It doesn't have to go through banks. So you can send it anywhere in the world, and so it can become an international payments. It also can be used for micropayments because there's such. It can be broken down into such small units. Pennies are only so small, but you can really make it tiny things. So you could do e-commerce. You can do micro e-commerce. So like charging to stream instead of a month subscription, you can charge actually for the minute or the second. There are certain ideas people are thinking of how to do this. You could do anything else normal you could do with money. You can give charity. Some places, some even Chabad houses accept Bitcoin, or you could give loans. You can use it as an investment and just hold on to it and see if it will, as a hedge against inflation. But another powerful thing that I think is particularly relevant to Jewish people is the idea that Bitcoin, because it's digital, it's not something which can be confiscated as easily. Let's say if you have your money in the bank, or if your wealth is stored in land or properties or something like that. And if you live in a country which doesn't respect you or respect civil rights, you never know when you're going to have to leave. Lots of our grandparents, lived in Europe, and they came on boats with all they had was what was in their pockets. Some people today are escaping from Syria and the Middle East with similar situations. So the idea that you can carry in your mind, because it's about knowing the password, so you could carry in your mind any amount of money just by knowing your password and travel anywhere in the world, and there's no metal detector that can find it. It's a very powerful idea as far as freedom and free travel for people. So overall, the idea is everything God created in His world, He created to express His glory. So this is a technological invention, and the idea is that it can be used for good things, and so it should be used, and that should be the goal of anyone who's involved in it, is to use Bitcoin or cryptocurrency in general for positive things. So back to what we said towards the beginning of the talk about the attributes of money. Bitcoin is very durable because it can be stored on a computer, a USB, printed on a paper, etched into metal. It can be backed up in multiple locations across the world, and it can even be beamed through satellites. It's portable because it can be transferred anywhere in the world by using internet, SMS, satellites, radio waves. It's divisible to even sub-Satoshi, to minuscule small amounts. It's uniform. Every single Bitcoin is exactly the same and worth exactly the same. It has a limited supply of exactly 21 million Bitcoins. There can never be made more, so it can't be inflated and decrease the purchasing power of Bitcoins that you're holding. And acceptability is the one where it's somewhat lacking in now. It's not the most acceptable thing. There are some people who live exclusively on Bitcoin, but it's difficult, and people are trying to make it easier and trying to make it better for commerce, but that is the thing that it's the weakest network effect, but it's something that people are working on. So as the question is it kosher? Well, it's kosher if you use it for kosher things, and it can be, and it lends itself more for positive things than for negative things. So that's the idea of that. Now, as far as this is getting a little more of the ethical ideas, or the more esoteric ideas about blockchain. Is Judaism the world's first blockchain? I happen to notice that there are a lot of similarities actually between just the way that Judaism works and a blockchain. The first is that we're dealing with an immutable ledger. So it's a record of that can't be changed. And so we know about that. We have the Ten Commandments, and we've got the Torah, which is written in stone, written clearly. The Torah is written letter by letter, and it hasn't changed thousands of years. So that is the kind of the basis of our religion. But immutability, which means that it can't be changed or can't be forged, also applies to our lives and the way that we believe that God is watching us and keeping a record. It says in Pirkei Avos, contemplate three things and you will not come to the hands of transgression. Know what is above you, a seeing eye, a listening ear, and all your deeds being inscribed in a book. And I found it very interesting about the correlation between the exact number of the 21 million Bitcoin and the limit, and also the exact number of 613 commandments. There are exactly 613 commandments, which are a limited number, but with infinite applications. So just like you can take a Bitcoin and you can divide up that 21 million to tiny, tiny, tiny fractions, each mitzvah has an infinite amount of, or nearly infinite amount of applications, how you can do it and the way that you can do it. And the Torah emphasizes this, that it has a very specific number, because it says everything which I command you shall neither add to it nor subtract from it, which tells us that we have to have exactly 613 mitzvahs, not any more and not any less. Also the idea of limited resources. When you have a money which is strictly limited, it brings to mind the idea of things, of limitations or limited resources in general. Also from Pirkei Avos, Rabbi Tarfon would say, the day is short, the work is much, the workers are lazy, the reward is great, and the master is pressing. So it reminds us that our time is limited, and it's when you have money, you're really trading your time for money. So I think that it's appropriate to have, just like you have a limited time, to have a money which has a limitation, because it shows that it's something that's valuable. In general, the blockchain. Now, blockchain means that a block really means like a file, almost. That's what, in the term of blockchain, that's really what it's referring to. And what it is that each block, each file is connected to the one. It makes a chain, and that's how that's how it all works. So similarly with Judaism, every generation, we know that it started with Moses receiving the Torah from Sinai. He gave it to Joshua, Yeshua, who gave it over to the elders. And every generation, the Torah is passed on from rabbis and from the people and those who study it. So it's also the idea of the Masorah, the tradition. And this, I thought, was a very interesting connection. So the way Bitcoin works is that there are miners. These are super powerful computers, and what they do is they process all of the transactions, and they run all of the code, and that's how they produce these blocks, and that's how they add to the blockchain, and that's how they keep everything moving forward. That's kind of like the rabbis. In every generation, those who study Torah and who analyze how things are supposed to work and teach others and keep things moving from one generation to the next. The way that a blockchain works is that everybody needs to be kind of in sync with each other, but you can have what's called a soft fork. You can be slightly separate as long as you're following the main general rules. So, like in Judaism, there are minhagim, there are different customs. Some people are Sephardi, some people are Ashkenazi. They're different, but we're all still in the same consensus. We're all working together, and that's the idea of being compatible with each other. And that's what consensus is in the blockchain, that when you are all following the same rules, you're in consensus, which is a good idea of how a person lives their life in general, and especially in Judaism. Hillel would say, do not separate yourself from the community. The final idea about like a kind of a moral lesson of a blockchain is that the way that the computers vote, the way that the computers prove that they're involved in the network, is they actually, by running all of the program and by running all of these calculations, they're doing proof of work. Proof of work means when you burn electricity, when these computers burn electricity, they're proving that they're invested in the system. You can't cheat it, you can't fake it. And the same thing is really true about life. You can't fake hard work. You can tell when work has been done. And this famous teaching, if someone says, I have not worked hard, but I have been successful, don't believe them. If he says, I have worked hard and I have been successful, believe them. So proof of work is a general idea in Judaism, is that hard work does pay off. And similarly in Bitcoin and in a blockchain, proof of work is the system of how you prove everything is legitimate.
The American Jews came from Judaism.
It's everything. It's all related. So in conclusion, Bitcoin is a revolutionary technology which allows people to store and transfer money without having to trust a third party. It's kosher, it's interesting, it could be used to make the world more free, and it may become the future of money. Thank you for listening, and I will take some questions, but I do want to give an offer to you. It looks like everyone here has phones. I want to give out free Bitcoin to one person, whoever is the fastest. Go on your phone, either to the App Store or the Play Store, and download HODL Wallet. Make sure that it's this app, because there's a couple that have the same word in it, but make sure that you're downloading this one.